Okay, in this section we're going to talk a bit about adding details to our character while they're walking. Now, because the character has been put on a peg, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a problem. In fact, you can create new drawing layers that are still parented to the same peg. And if you click on the little eyeballs to the left of the peg under your layers, the eyeballs make the toggle the visibility of the layer. So turning off the visibility of the peg layer will just make the character walk in place. So that way you can still focus on the character's walk cycle in place if needed, but then you can also see the bigger picture and see what the character looks like when they're walking across. So if you want to create a new layer that has a drawing that's still attached to the peg, you can go to the plus sign to the right of layers, and before you do that, make sure that you have a layer that's within the peg system, so like the head, for example, selected. Go to the plus sign to the right of layers and hit New Drawing Layer. Then, when the new layer appears, you can toggle off the visibility of the peg so that the character can walk in place and you can match the details a little better. Then you're going to want to go to the first frame in that sequence and start drawing the detail. Now, for any kind of details that you add to your character, I would recommend doing it one at a time. So the eye separate. I would maybe even separate the pupil and the eye because there's some things to consider with the pupil. The hair, if you do the hair, do the back and the front of the hair as two separate parts, potentially. Or any type of different varying details of the hair. So if you have two bangs or two sections of the bangs or a ponytail, separate those. Now for the eye, if you're doing a side view of the eye, keep in mind that the eye is a sphere, and if you're looking at it from a front view, it's going to look a little different than when you're drawing it from a side view. Side view is a little bit more triangular-ish, where the points of the edges of the eye are at the corners, and then you have the front of the eye, which is a little bit more rounded. So just keep that in mind when drawing a side eye, because the side of an eye looks a bit different than the front of the eye. Then for this first part, I recommend working with the eye by itself and not with the pupil, just the eye, because we're going to need to track the eye along the side of the head. Okay, so I recommend also, if there's anything that can be used as a reference, so in this case, the head position can be a helpful reference. We can onion skin the head specifically and the eye and leave everything else without an onion skin. And you can do that by selecting the onion skin to the left of the layers. They look like a stack of pancakes. So depending on the details, sometimes I go straight ahead with putting in the details, and then sometimes I'll go with the keyframes, extremes, breakdowns, and then filling in the in-between. So in this case, I'm kind of going straight ahead, but with the most important poses first. So contact, then the down, then the passing, then the up, then the contact, in that case. The order sort of matters, but it sort of doesn't. The priority for, say, the eye shape is one, making sure that the volume stay consistent, but we also have to be careful that the angle of the lines of the eye stay consistent. So not just volume control, but also line control, so you don't get lines that are too wobbly. So that's just something to check. Also, the character's head might have a little bit of a rotation as it goes, so just kind of tracking that. Okay, so I'm scrolling back and forth. Just watch out for size variation. The first round through, when adding details, may or may not go well. So that's okay. If there's mistakes, you can always adjust in your layer. That's one thing that's nice about having them all separated or divided into separate layers, that when you erase on that layer, you don't have to worry about compromising any of the layers above or below. You can also always select with the selection tool and stretch or rotate or adjust accordingly. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start filling in the in-betweens for the eyes. Again, probably prioritizing one side over the other. So for frame 2, prioritizing the red eye, which is the before frame. Just like we were doing with the rest of the walk, and again, most importantly, we want to make sure that the eye looks like it's anchored properly into the head. We don't want the eye swirling around on the character's face. That would be a bit awkward. Oh, and I have this little piece that seems to not be reacting. It must be on a different layer. So if that ever happens, which is really common, it's a really easy mistake to make. I'm going to toggle the visibility of some of the other layers to see when this little blue line disappears. And that's how I'll know what layer it's on. Okay, I'll try onion skin. Oh, there it is. All right, so it is on the ground layer. That's okay. We just select the ground layer, make a selection of that object, and get rid of it. So easy mistake to make. If you ever draw on the wrong layer, you can always cut and paste it into the correct layer, or jump on that layer and delete it if it's not something that you wanted. Really common mistake to make. Okay, so continuing with the eyes, we're just going to fill in the in-betweens. And again, I'm watching for volume control, but also that the shape that the upper and lower eyelid make is proper. Yeah, that doesn't wiggle around too much. Okay, I think by this point you get the picture, so I'm going to speed up this part. It's just filling in the rest of the in-betweens, and then we're going to move on to the hair. Okay, so once you have all of the details in place, it's good to cycle it and see how it looks. So to do that, we'll just shrink the duration so that it is the duration of the cycle. Click on the little curl with the arrow on it in order to have it loop the playback. And then you can check the way that the detail cycles, both up close, but also at 100% view or at the size of the camera. So up close will be good to see it in more detail, but keeping in mind also that we're not usually going to be seeing it as that tightly. Again, depending on how far away the character is from the screen, whether it's a close-up or a long shot. Okay, so looping the playback, once you're satisfied, you can start switching to the next detail. So this one's going to be the back of the hair. Now I would recommend having the back of the hair and the front of the hair as separate parts. Or if you have the hair that can be segmented into pieces, try to do that if you can. That way there's less items to track. Now for the back, I added some strands. I think I might simplify that, at least for the first round. So I may take those strands out. Might be better just to outline the shape of the hair. trying to get too lost in the details. The idea of this first draft is just to make sure that the hair is shaped properly and that it is maintains the correct mass and where it's anchored into the head. That can be a big challenge of hair. Hair can sometimes take a couple of tries in order to get right. So I'm not going to worry about the top of the head because there's nothing, unless you're doing somebody like Marge Simpson where the hair extends past the top of the skull. If the hair just lays flat on the top of the head, then I'm not going to animate the hair as being on top of the head unless something sticks out from it. Otherwise, if there's any kind of wiggling or anything, it's going to look like the character's wearing a toupee. So I'm just worrying about where the hair extends from the back of the head. And I got to keep in mind when the character is going up, long hair is going to be coming. If the character's going up, the hair is going to come down. If the character's going down, the hair is going to go up a little bit. But we have to keep it proportionate to how much the character is moving. In this walk cycle, the character is not moving a huge amount. The character's not jumping, they're not running, they're not dropping a distance, so we got to keep it subtle. Also want to make sure to maintain volume control, which can be more of a challenge than you'd think, especially with hair. So we're just going to go through and see how it looks. Now the shoulders and the body are rotating a little bit, so that is going to make a difference with the hair, like how much of the hair is visible. When the character has their back a little bit towards us, we'll probably see more of the character's hair. And when the character's chest is more towards us, we'll probably see less of it, at least the back of the hair. Now, that'll be a little different with bangs, or depending on where the details of the hair is on the character's head. So I think at this point, you probably have a good idea of what I'm doing. So I'm going to speed up this section and go through it quickly. Again, one thing you're going to want to check is volume control. That is something I have to fix on, or I end up having to fix on this a little bit, is the length of the hair changing compared to where it is in the skull. So when the character's raising up and down, even though the hair is going to be flopping a little bit, we have to make sure that the hair's overall length stays the same, and that can be a really easy mistake to make. So also with something like hair, where you're having overlapping action follow through, it's good to have the hair done straight ahead, but that also means there's going to be more mistakes. So straight ahead's good for overlapping action because then you can track it on the body as they go and kind of adjust the reactions to it to your main action in real time. But it is also a lot easier to make drawing mistakes, so volume control mistakes, line control mistakes. So we're going to go through the rest of this and then check it with the first drawing, because this is, again, going to be looped, and make some changes from there. So yeah, there's definitely some changes we need to make, and that first set of hair I drew originally, we're gonna take that out. We don't need that. We'll leave out strands. That can be something that's added in its own layer later on. But let's keep the hair simplified for now, just outlining its general mass. So again, I'm going to speed up this part so we can move on to the next section. Okay, so once you are done with the back of the hair, we can, again, make sure the duration of the video is shrunk down so that it's just one cycle. Then we can play it as a loop to see if it works out. Okay, so assuming you're reasonably happy with it, we can move on to the next part. So we have the back of the hair, so now let's make a layer for the bangs. So the bangs are going to be on its own layer. In fact, I would recommend if you have hair that has bangs that, let's say, go in different directions, which is not uncommon, especially if you're into like the anime style, or even just cartoon style, where you just have bangs on either side. Those would be best off done in separate chunks. Or if you have hair that's a ponytail, or you have hair coming off the top, or you have like a little antenna on the top, any of those things would be best off separated into its own layers so you can track each of those elements one at a time, especially hair, because hair is tough. hair can often go through multiple adjustments. So this character has two sets of bangs, but she's in a side view. So the front and the two sets of bangs could be combined together in the side view. So it's got this little tuft at the top, and then the rest is a little bit more detailed along the side. But let's keep it simplified. So I'll just have the little spike at the top, and the rest is just going to be an outline. And therefore, if I want to go through a draft that has the individual strands, I can do that, but I can follow the details of this more simplified version. Same thing with the back of the hair. Just controlling the overall shape of the mass, a little easier to track, then I can work on the details later if I choose to. So, again, keeping in mind when the character is going down, the hair is going to go up a little bit, but not where the hair is rooted. But where the hair is rooted will follow the skull. But any strands that are sticking out are going to go up a little bit. Now, one thing that can be a challenge, especially if you're doing lots of little hair strand details or little spikes coming out, is you want to maintain the volume control of those little spikes. So again, that can be sometimes a lot to track. We also need to control the line quality. So is the bang a little bit spiky, like a little bit angular in its edges, or is it more rounded? You have to be careful because if it varies between the two too much or too suddenly, it can feel like it's losing its mass, or that its mass is a little bit too rubbery, so we have to be careful about that. Again, this first round of hair, I recommend going straight ahead, even though there are going to be volume issues with this, because straight ahead is just a big candidate for volume control issues that we're going to have to fix. But going straight ahead with hair allows you to react to what the body is doing and what the head is doing. Okay, so head goes down, bangs go up, but are still rooted down. And then when the character goes to its lowest point and starts to rise up, the bangs are going to fall further down on the face because of gravity pushing into it. Okay, so that's basically the gist of doing bangs. And again, after the first round, or as we go, we're going to scrub back and forth and check and see if the volume control of the hair has been maintained or the general shapes of the hair is being maintained. It's definitely going to need some fixing, but we'll try to do that as we go. So that's the gist of it. So I'm going to speed up this part so that we can move on to the next section. Okay, so once you're reasonably sure that you're happy with the bangs, you can cycle them, play back, and see how it looks. If everything looks okay, we're ready for the next part. So depending on the details of your character is going to change how this reads coming up, or what details you go with. So in this case, I'm going to be doing a cowl. This character wears a shawl or cowl over her shoulders. So I'm going to add that in. So it attaches to her neck, and it lays across her arms, going about midway down. So the position of it on her neck isn't really going to change very much, but the fabric around her arms is going to change a little bit. It's going to not necessarily expand, but stretch a little bit as the arms move further apart, and also it's going to respond to the up and down motion of the body. So again, doing this straight ahead, we'll have to be a little bit careful. Again, volume control is usually an issue when you go straight ahead. So just have to keep in mind that keep this loose and be willing to go back and make changes after the first run through. So as she goes down, I'm going to be spreading out the cowl a little bit, catching a tiny bit of air, but also keeping in mind how much her arms move apart. Okay. So again, depending on the details, this is a detail that is partially attached to the body, like the neck, but also has a part that spreads out, like around the arms. If needed, depending on how complicated this detail was to do, or this part of the body was to do, I could have done the neck as its own, the line on the neck as its own piece, because then I could just track it up and down on the body, since it wouldn't really have much, if any, overlapping action per se. And then the parts that are coming out from the body, around the arms, then I could have done those separately. But I don't think in this case, this isn't a very detailed outfit, so might be okay as is. Now, this particular outfit doesn't really have much in the way of detail. It's more animation friendly. But if it was like an anime character who's got a ton of details, I would not add these details in this layer. This is just for the outline. Same thing as we did before with the strands of the hair in the back of the hair. Do the outline of the hair first, and then you can add strands later. Here's the same way. You want to do the outline of the object first, or the shawl, or the cape, dilly boppers, the hat. Don't add stripes or details or buttons or anything on that. Don't do that at the same time as you're drawing the outline. That's just a lot of extra stuff to keep track of. And more things that can go wrong, and then if you need to fix anything, the more difficult it is to make those fixes, because now you have to be careful to erase around the elements that you do want to keep if there was anything else you wanted to keep. And sometimes you may do a round of details, or a round of overlapping action, check it, and it just does not work. Doesn't look good, you got to start it over. And if that's the case, if there was part of it that you did like, and so let's say the way the neck details, the way the collar of the outfit lands, but the rest of it's wrong, well, if the collar was on a separate layer than the rest of the details, then you could just delete either the layer or all the drawings on the layer that had the details, and you could start it over. But if they were on the same layer and you have to go and delete those details, you would either A, have to delete everything and start over, including the parts you liked, or you'd have to carefully delete the parts that you want to get rid of and go through frame by frame and do that, which you could do. But the issue that you'd run into with that is that it takes more time. And if it takes more time, all that can add up. So I guess it's a matter of working smarter, not harder when you can. Sometimes this can be unavoidable and things are just going to take a long time, but the more you can try to save time, the better off you'll be. So that's sort of the gist of adding little details like this. So I'm going to skip ahead, fast forward here so that we can move on to the next section, which will be adding her dress. Okay, so for this last part, we're going to add her dress. Now, if a character has a dress, long robes, anything to that effect, we don't necessarily want to animate the character with the dress or the long robes or any of the hanging drapery from the get-go. You never want to do that. You're better off with trying to do the body underneath first. You may not necessarily have to do all of the shapes or details of the body, but you at least want the silhouette, because the fabric is just going to be following the body and reacting to the body. So if you have the outline of the dress or the robe as part of the main walk when you're first putting it in, it's going to make it harder, not easier, and there's going to tend to be more mistakes. If you have the undersketch or you have the character's body structure underneath, then you can build the fabric on top of that. So I'm going to go through here and go step by step, again, straight ahead, because the fabric is going to be reacting to the body, and just have to keep in mind where the fabric roughly falls down to. Now, when the character's knee is bent or the leg is raised, there's only so much that's going to be helpful, but using it as a starting point, the fabric is supposed to lay about the level of the mid-upper portion of the character's thigh. But again, I kind of have to keep in mind where when the legs are bent. So there's probably going to be some issues in here to start with. So if the character is going down, fabric is going to raise up a little bit, and if the character's going up, the fabric's going to extend down. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind where the fabric attaches. So you may have the fabric fall down or flop down as the figure moves up, but where it attaches at the hips or at the shoulders, depending on if it's a dress or a skirt, that part is going to be raising up. So if the character's coming down, the attachment is moving down, but the fabric is fluttering up. So mass control can be a challenge in this part. So we'll just go through and see how it looks, and if we need to make any changes, we'll make them as we go. Again, first time around, especially going straight ahead, there's usually going to be some kind of volume control to keep in mind. So again, the character comes down, we want to catch a little bit of air inside the dress, bringing it up a little bit. Again, at the same time, we do have to sometimes think about what kind of fabric this is. So this is more like a sort of a light fabric. If it's a very heavy or dense fabric, or if it's a very loose or very light fabric, that might make a difference. But this one's just sort of a generally sort of light fabric. And again, the fabric's going to have a reaction. It's not going to have a huge reaction. Again, the character's not running or jumping or flying through the air, which would cause a much more dramatic reaction from the fabric. Okay, so that's basically the gist of adding fabric, or adding drapery to the character. I think I might have this fabric a little too high at points. Okay, well, we'll see how it looks, and then go back if needed. Okay, so that is the gist of working with different details, some details being anchored onto the character's body and some of the details flowing from the character's body. So I'm going to speed up the rest of this part. Just walk through the rest of the steps here of drawing the dress. But that's basically about it. Again, try to go simple when you can. As simple as you can get away with to start. Yeah, that's way too high. Okay. Anyway, go as simple as you can to start with, and then you can add details. Add each of those details in their own individual layers. And that way, it's less and less that you have to keep track of all at the same time. Also, keep in mind, these layers are still attached to the peg, so even though this character is walking in place, once we cycle the rest of the items that we've been adding, they're already attached to the peg. We can turn the visibility of the peg on and have them all follow the peg, so they'll all be walking together. So I'm going to fast forward to that part. Okay, so now we're going to cycle these details. So now assuming that you're reasonably pretty happy with how the details all cycle when you have the duration set to the first cycle and have the loop activated, now it's time that we take this and actually cycle it for real. So we can extend the duration and cycle these details the way we had cycled the rest of the walk. So I'm just going to grab the work area, or the duration, sorry, not the work area. The duration, and extend it. I believe we had it to about, yeah, we had about 80 frames. So we'll extend a little past that, so when the character walks off stage, there would be a little bit of space after that. So it doesn't just end as soon as she steps off. So I'm going to delete these extra parts that extend past the first cycle, because those, again, are repeats of the first frame, and we don't want to use those as part of the cycle. So we're going to select the layers, or select the first frame, then shift select the last frame of the layers or the drawings that you want to cycle. And then select the first frame and shift select the bottom layer of the first frame of the layers that you're going to be adding the cycle to. So you can do this one at a time, or you can do them in groups. Okay, so once they're cycled, you can check it and see how it looks. Okay, so assuming that you're, again, check for any kind of popping. You'll usually notice that at the end of each cycle. So in this case, it would be at the end of when the first contact's repeated again. So assuming that everything looks okay, turns out smoothly, you can tap the eyeballs to the left of the peg to make the influence of the peg visible again. So now we have the character again walking across the stage. All right, so that's looking pretty all right. So at this point, this is probably satisfactory for about this level of the class. You could optionally put in another set of layers where you're detailing the character, making sure that they are in fact on model, because there's probably still some mistakes in here. Putting in more details, making it look a little bit more like the character. You can ink and paint as well, but we're not going to deal with that in this class. About this level is fine. And that is working with walk cycles.